Welcome to this video. In this first video I'm going to look at just basically creating a new Windows application in Visual Studio. The language that we're going to use is Visual Basic. I'm going to look at doing a simple connection to a database and binding multiple rows of data to a drop down, well, it's a combo box actually. So we'll start off by opening up Visual Studio. When you open it up, if you're prompted what language to use, we're going to use Visual Basic as the language today. So make sure that you select Visual Basic as the language today. And we're just going to create a new project. And we can either do that from here or go to File, New Project. And I'm going to call my new project Ticket Booking System. Might not let us save it like that because I've already got one called that. Shall find out. Okay, so there's my ticket booking system, and as you can see, Visual Studio automatically creates your first form for you, and it gives it the file name form1.vb. But we want to give it a meaningful file name, because if you have lots of forms and they're just called form 1, form 2, form 3, and then somebody says, for example, one of those forms is a customer form to capture customer information or register a new customer, and somebody says go and update the customer form, well then you've got to go through form 1, form 2, form 3 to figure out which is the customer form. Where if you named it something sensible like FRM customer, which shows that it's a form and it's a customer form, it'd be much easier to identify that form. So we generally always start off with the first form being your main form. So I'm going to rename this form to FRM main. Okay, and also I'm going to give the caption of that form a sensible caption. So I'm going to call it Ticket Booking System. Press return there and it updates my form. I'll just make it a little bit bigger. So the first thing that I would like to do is to add a combo box, and a combo box is just like a drop down list. So I'm going to have one that's going to display all my artists and another one that's going to display all the venues. Am I doing the venues for this video? We'll just do the artists in this one. I'll do the venues in the next video. So we'll pull over the combo box and I'll give that a sensible name. Again, moving over at the properties in the right hand side for this combo box. Say the combo box is called combo box 1. That doesn't really mean anything, so we'll give it a sensible name, and I'm going to call mine CBO for combo box, and I'm going to call it artist because I want to show a list of artists in there. Just press return. And the next thing I'm going to do is drag a label over and add a label to my combo box that's called artists. Actually, I want to change the name of the label. But I will change the name of my label as well, because it's good practice. Right, so we've got a combo box and that's great, but it hasn't got anything in it. And what I want to do is I want to be able to load all the artists out of my artist database into this combo box. So I'll go and get my database, and this is available as a download with this video. See if I can remember where I've put it. Actually, where's this project? I'm going to just check where this project's living. So if I right click on the project and go to properties, pretty sure it's got the file path in here somewhere. Very slow this morning. Actually, no, let's right click and do open folder in Windows Explorer. So we can see this is stored in temporary projects, and I think this is where a lot of people have problems with losing their files, losing their projects, and losing their data. So before I go any further, just close that down. What I'm going to do is I'm going to save this project. So file, save ticket booking system as. So that's the project I'm saving, not a form. And I'm going to navigate to a sensible location. So I'm going to navigate to my teaching folder, create a new folder called VB project, and it's going to create a ticket booking system in that folder. We'll just go and have a look at that. So here now I've got this VB projects folder, the ticket booking system in there, and I can save all my files into there. Now where did I have my original file? You just bear with us a minute, I've got to find my copy of the database. No, not in there. Just do a search for my... I think it's called something like gig database. Gig, there we are. Still on. I'm just going to shut the door a minute because I can hear my dog snoring in the next room and I don't want it to come across on the video. That would be typical of infamous dog snoring. Right, I'm going to save this database somewhere sensible and then we'll have a look at the file. Can we not save the whole database? Save the access database. Save the current database as a new object. No. Open file location, that's the one I want. So I'm going to copy that from there and copy it into a resources folder within my ticket booking system. So then all my files are bundled together. Okay, brilliant. So let's have a look at this database. It's quite a simple database. I've created it so that all it has in it is these 4 tables. It's got an artist table, a gig table, a ticket table, and a venue table. Don't worry about the queries, I was just messing about with them earlier on. So the first thing I want to do is get all of these artists so that they are populated in my artist drop down list. So how do we go about doing that? Well, it doesn't matter which table or which piece of data out of my database I want to use. The first thing I have to do is to create a connection to my database. And because if we think about the thought process of when do I want to do that, well, what I want to happen is when this form is displayed, when it's loaded, I want people to be able to view the artists in this drop-down list then. So in that case, I should probably set up my connection maybe even before my form load starts, and then start working on binding my data to my controls within the form load. So I'm just going to double click on my form to get the form load functionality, and that's quite good because it gives us this code for free. But because I want to be able to access my data connection from within anywhere within my form, I'm going to set up my data connection here. And before I can create a data connection, I've actually got to import the OLEDB library, and I need to do that up here. So this is the system library, and it's data, and it's the OLEDB library that we're using today. So I create an instance, I create a variable that's going to be an instance of an OLEDB connection, and this connection is going to allow me to connect to my database. So I've called it the underscore gig DB connection because it's a connection to my gigs database, and the v underscore shows that we're working with a variable. Various ways to call your variable names. For the latest way, I would check the documentation on MSDN, Microsoft Developer Network, for the recommended version of how to declare your variables and your control names. So what I'm creating now is a new instance of a database connection. So what I've got to do is I've got to tell it who the provider is. Well, this is an MS Access database, so I'm going to say that the provider is Microsoft ACE Access OLEDB connection, and it's version 12.0, and the data source itself, you need to find out where that data source lives. And I can just simply go and get the file name of that data source. So first of all, I'm copying over the path, and then I've got to append the name of that database at the end there. I'll just double check that that's the right name. Okay, I'll give it a capital G at the start there. So that's going to create my connection to my database. So with the loading of the data, I said we would do this in the form load event. And before we load any data, we've got to tell the database connection, or we've got to send a command via the database connection. It's an SQL command that tells the database what data we want to return from the database. So let's create a variable to store our SQL in. And that's going to be a string. We'll just simply populate a string, but it's quite an easy one, this one, because I'm just going to select all the records from the artist table. And I need a command to be able to pass that string or execute that SQL query to the database connection. So this requires me to make a db command object. And I pass the I'm going to create a new instance of the command, and I'm going to pass in my SQL and the database connection that I want to run that command on. And before I can run that command, I've got to open up my database connection. And always remember, when you open your database connection, at some point you must close that connection as well. So maybe this isn't the best place to close it. Later on we might want to move that or deal with opening and closing slightly differently. But for what we're doing now, we're just going to open it when the form loads and close it when we're finished doing whatever we need to do with that connection. Right, so we've got a command. How do we execute that command? So we need to run that command in some way. And in order to do that, we need to think about what sort of command we want to run. And if you remember in class, we said there was a number of different commands. So for example, execute scalar returns one row of data, and that could be a combination of data that comes from a number of different tables. Or execute non-query tends to be used to sort of insert or update or delete something from the database because it doesn't return any values back from the database. Execute reader allows us to return a number of rows from the database. So execute reader is the command that we're going to run today. And if I'm going to run execute reader, then I want to load those rows into something that can handle a reader response. And funnily enough, VB just happens to have a reader object. So I guess that's what we will be using today. So I've got my reader object, and my reader object is going to be populated with the data that is returned when I execute this reader command. So now we need a way of getting the data from here into a combo box. And the way that we go about doing that is, first of all, we need to check to see if the reader's got any data in it. And that's quite easy, because we'll just say, if my data reader's got any rows, then go and get some data out of it. So what you can do is you can read each row in the data reader. And the way that we do that is we'll say while data reader dot read do something, and that'll simply go through each record in the reader object. So it'll go to the first artist in the row and allow us to get that data. And then when we're finished with that, it goes around the while loop to the second artist in the row or the second record in the row and get that data. And it'll just keep doing that until it reads to the last row in the set. So how do we get that data? I must apologise, but my dogs are now fighting in the play fighting in the living room, so you can probably hear some growling going on, but it's not dog fighting, they're just playing. Okay, so just to show that that data is coming out now, and just to sort of check that everything's working before we get too far along the journey here and get stuck in a little pickle, I'm just going to check the data that's coming out of there. So I'm just doing a simple message box, and what I'm going to do is check for. Now if we go back and check our artist table, we can see that there's two columns, and the columns are 0 base. So this is classed as column 0 and this is classed as column 1. So what I want to do is just get the value of column 0, and we'll do that by doing that. So this is saying, with my data reader, get the value of column 0, which I know is an integer, and this represents an integer. And then the next thing is to get the artist, I'll just put a space there, otherwise the string will be all squashed together. Get the artist name, and remember I said the artist name was in column 1 of my data set, which means that it's in column 1 of my reader row, and I know that that's a string because if you look at the design of this table, ID is a number, is an integer. An artist name is text, which is also a string. So we'll just save that there and run it and see what happens. Yeah, my dog's growling. Slow because it's building it. So it's found a problem. It doesn't recognize artist. Syntax missing in query expression artist. It looks like it's just took in star artist and not the select bit. Is it because that select has to be in capital letters? I wouldn't have thought it was that. Let's give it a go. Pretty sure that wouldn't cause a problem, yeah. Missing in query expression artist. So why is that not working? So I've got the correct path. Oh, hang on, this isn't the path for the folder that I'm currently working in. This is the path for an old project I was working on. And that's good because it shows you that you need to check that you're working with the correct path and the correct files. And so we'll just copy that part of the path and stop this. And another problem might be that because I've got it open, the database open in Access, it might be locking the database as well. So we'll just take this to here. So I've got my database connection. I've got my SQL. I've got my command. I pass in my SQL to my database connection. I open up the connection and I execute the command. So let's just check my statement here. Provider equals Microsoft.ace.oledb 12 data source and the name of the database. Yeah, nothing wrong with that. Select all from artist. And that was my dog in the background. VBDBOLEDB command, yeah. Correct. Select all from. Missing the obvious. I'm just saying select all artists and I missed the from bit of the SQL statement. See, even the best of will make mistakes. So let's try that again now. Should probably have some try catch handler that says if this fails, then close the database connection. So I can't alter the artist ID to type double. I'm not trying to convert it to a double. Data reader. Now make access the items, has rows, item. So it's basically what it's saying is that converting this data type to a double is invalid. This is a bit of a red herring over here. So we'll just stop that a minute. So I've got artist ID plus the value of the first column within that reader plus the artist name. Do I need to put that to string maybe? Because the message box is dealing with a string. So we'll try again. So here we can see that the third, so it's come into the first row within the data reader and outputs the artist ID and the artist name. The second row in the reader, the artist ID, the artist name, and so on and so forth for each artist record in each row. And then it gets to the end and it comes and loads the form. So now we need to get that data from within there into this combo box here. And there's a couple of ways that we can do that. One way is to create a data table. So I'm going to do this before I load my data. Oops. I'll create a data table as a new data table. And I'm going to specify the column headings within that data table. So I'm going to add my first column. Oh, for God's sake. My dogs won't settle until I let them through. They think that I'm talking to somebody and they're worried about having the attention taken elsewhere. So in the first column, I'm going to add the column heading ID, and that's going to reflect the artist ID. And I'm going to say that that column type is going to be an integer basically. So get type, sorry. System dot int 32, because that's the type that it's going to be. It's going to be an integer that I'm going to get. And for my second data table column, I want this to reflect the artist's name. So I'm going to call that one artist name, and that's going to be of type string. And instead of assigning these values to a message box now, I'm going to assign them to columns within my data table. With columns and rows within my data table actually. So what I'm going to say is for each row within this reader, I'm going to add a row to my data table. And the first column in my data table, which I know is the ID because I specified that here, I'm going to say I want this value to be the value that comes from the first column in my data reader row. And the second column in my data table I specified to be the artist name. So I'm going to get the, didn't like that there, did it? Get string. Something wrong with that. And that's going to be column 1 from my data reader. What does it not like there? Alright, because I try to get it from the data table and not the data reader. So that's going to get my artist name. And now, when I've done all that, I want to say I want to bind this data table to my combo box. So simply just say the data source equals to the data table. And that's that. And now I can say within my combo box that I want the value that's going to be displayed to equal the name of what I've given the data table column here. And the value of, when you actually click on that item in the combo box, I want to give that a value that you pick up on the click, and that's going to be the ID that I've specified in the data table up here. But finish. Oh yeah, I forgot. When you're finished with your reader, always close your reader as well. So we'll just close that down here. Okay. So we'll save that and we'll run it. And now we can see that all of our artists are in the combo box. And that's how you load your data. There is another slightly more graceful way of doing things, and you should always kind of think of better ways of writing your code, if you like. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to cut this from here for now. We'll save this and I'll show you an alternative way to do it. An alternative way to do it is to use this thing called a data adapter. And the adapter allows us to run a command on the database, which means we don't need this data reader object anymore. Just comment that out for now. And with your OLEDB adapter, sorry I didn't need that there, again, in the same way as you execute a command on your data reader, you're passing in your XML and your data connection. You do the same for your adapter, and then you say, with the data from my adapter, fill this data table with that data. So it's doing exactly what we did before, but with just 2 lines of code. So that's a nicer way of doing it. We'll just run that now. Oh, it doesn't do anything. So what am I missing from there? Oh yeah, I forgot to set the data source of the combo box to be the data table. So there you have it. 2 ways of doing the same thing. So I'll comment out the data adapter way, and I'll just leave that there for reference, and I'm going to put back in the other way so that you've got both methods for your records. This way is good way of demonstrating how to get data out of the database using a reader, because sometimes you do want to read through each row and test the values of the data within that row. But if you just simply want to fill something like a combo box or a table or a record set or a grid or a graph with some data, you would probably use the data adapter option and just fill it in that way. Okay. Right, and on that note, I'm going to stop that video right there, and in our next video I will be looking at combining data from multiple tables.